Well, hello there and welcome. My name is Kylie Patchett and I'm your host, and welcome to the Wild and Finally Fucking Free podcast. This show is all about sharing the real and raw stories from women who have undergone midlife metamorphosis, taken a leap of faith, or broken the ties that bind them in patterns of staying stuck, small, and like their needs don't matter. You see, I believe that the years leading up to and during menopause are a rite of passage, a deep invitation after so many years of giving our time, attention, and energy to others to carve out the same time, energy, and attention in ourselves, in our health, our love, our connection, our vitality, our purpose, our real needs and deep desires. You know, those ones lying dormant underneath all the duty, responsibility, pushing, striving, and achieving of our 20s and 30s. You see, at this stage in our lives, we find ourselves shifting identity potentially, no longer caring as much what other people think, and left wondering why on earth we have not given ourselves permission to do life in the way we truly want to. In this show, I speak to the women brave enough to truth talk their own midlife shedding skin stories, and the healers and helpers who help them transition through these crossroads of change. This is the midlife magic you didn't even know you needed, and I am so freaking glad you found us. Let's dive in. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wild and Finally Fucking Free podcast. Today, I have another healer and helper episode for you. So rather than talking about personal story, these episodes are all about speaking with people who help us understand the changes in our body and our brain that affect our transition through menopause. And today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to neuroscientist, author, speaker, and director of the Think Brain suite of online training programs, Dr. Sarah McKay. How are you?
I am very good. Thank you for having me on the pod.
I am very excited about this. I was sharing with you before we started recording that of all the days that I've had a really, really disturbed night's sleep, which is actually unusual for me, but definitely perimenopausal, I have to interview a brain health.
Oh, well, maybe we might sort you out during the conversation.
Please. That would be really good. Okay, so to kick off, I've just finished your first book, and you're just about to release your second book, and we'll get to that when we're chatting, and actually writing your third, did you say before?
There's perhaps one in the works.
Plans in the works.
Early days, very, very early days.
So I wanted to read to kick off our chat together. So Sarah's book is called The Women's Brain Book, The Neuroscience of Health, Hormones and Happiness. And I've just reread it in preparation for this interview. I just want to read this one particular paragraph because it really, really captures everything that we're going to talk about. So Sarah says, my goal is to take you on a chronological tour across the lifespan to explore how our minds and brains are shaped and sculpted by our genes and hormones, our life experiences, society and culture, and our thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. The story begins in the womb, and chapters focus on infancy and girlhood, puberty and the menstrual cycle, the teenage years, mental health, romance and sex, pregnancy and motherhood, menopause, and finally longevity and old age. My focus is unashamedly on the female lifespan, but naturally many of the themes explored apply equally to males and females. So when I read that, I was like, wow, that's a lot of different stages of life and transitions that we go through when you put it in those kind of terms. Can you talk about when in the book you actually talk about someone asked you to write something about menopause, and all of a sudden you have a kind of moment where you go, wow, I've been in a woman's body and brain for 40 years. Can you talk about that realization?
Yeah. So, I suppose that kind of comes back to sort of the origin story of the book, which was I was asked to write a book and I didn't have any ideas.
Yeah.
And the woman who's now my agent, Jean Rickman, said, well, let's have a chat. What have you ever written about that's resonated with an audience? And it was this article I'd written a couple of years earlier when I was doing some work for the ABC about menopause and brain fog. So I said that to Jean. I said, well, I wrote this article on menopause and brain fog. And she went, oh, let's write a book on menopause. And I was like, I was in my early 40s. And I was like,
Not there yet.
Not there. Not there yet. And then she said, oh, what about baby brain? Is that a thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, oh, that's a load of rubbish. I don't think there's much out there on that, which is funny because
is that not the topic of your?
That is the topic of my second book. Now there is a ton of information out there. But as we were having that conversation, that was when I went, oh gosh, you know what? I'm a neuroscientist. I occupy a female body and brain, and I have my entire lifespan. I thought, wow, I've never considered the two together before, because neuroscience is such an enormous subject.
Yes.
And, you know, I kind of thought it was just some sort of oversight on my part, or, well, I've just missed the literature, or I've been so busy thinking about other things. Particularly, I was always very much interested in plasticity during development, early brain development.
Yes.
I thought, oh, well, I've just neglected this whole field of women's health research in terms of neuroscience, but it turns out there wasn't a lot there.
There wasn't
anyway. That was not an oversight on my part. That was an oversight on the discipline. But that has changed even from when I started writing this book that we're discussing today back late 2016, and it's now 2023, and the field has kind of exploded. Partly that's because it takes a really long time to do good science, but also women are kind of working their way up the ranks. There's a whole lot more interest and understanding that female as a biological variable is really important to consider when it comes to the brain. So, you know, my moment of aha coincided quite nicely with the field opening up as well. So it's been a really exciting time to be, you know, working in the space.
Yeah. When you talk about that interests me, because I mean, I'm originally a scientist. I wouldn't call myself a scientist anymore because I haven't been in science for a good long time. But why is there such a dearth of research in women specific? And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, is it because of this pesky, you know, cycle that we have that makes us a little bit harder to measure and control, I guess, in science experiments?
There's a whole lot of kind of reasons which have collided over the years. I mean, there's the old, and it's very the patriarchy. It's very easy to kind of blame the patriarchy, men dominating science. But for many years, and historically, we're talking about decades ago, you know, the sort of the standard human body to look at in research was a young, fit, healthy male. Just hadn't occurred to anyone that there would be biological differences that were worth studying.
Yes.
For a long time within animal research, which always kind of comes before clinical research, either only male animals were used because it was thought that, well, let's reduce as many variables as we can, which is an important thing to do in science. So if we reduce the female fluctuations of hormones, we don't have to worry about them as an added variable. Or what was probably more likely was male or female sex was never actually recorded in the animals that were used within, you know, all of the hundreds of thousands of experiments that have been done for many, many years. And certainly all through my scientific career when I was working in the research laboratory and lots of different countries, lots of different parts of the world, we never recorded whether it was a male or a female, or if we did, that data was never then considered down the track. It just almost never occurred to anyone. It wasn't that we were like, let's exclude the females. It was just never occurred to anyone. And then when it was thought, well, let's include both, you know, we were having to double the numbers. We were, you know, there's kind of a lot of sort of forces in play. But I think what we've started to realize is the knock-on effects of, for many different reasons, excluding female biology from a lot of the research which is seen as standard. We're starting to see knock-on effects impacting women's health in the real world. And you know, there's not been like, well, that's happening, let's ignore it. Actually, there's been a whole lot of steps and processes put in place by journals, by research organizations, by funding providers that have said you must have, you know, biological sex as a variable is now mandated as part of that. It's had some really funny kind of knock-on effects, though. I was speaking to one researcher a while ago, and she had put in a research grant wanting to study something to do with the biology of the placenta. And then the research funders came back and said, well, there's no males included in the study. You know, it was almost like that box wasn't ticked, so reject. And it's like, well, how about we just like we were talking about pendulums swinging one way or another. It's sometimes it's gone a bit irrational.
Yeah.
That's just one little silly example, but broadly speaking, there's a real recognition now. And we're slowly starting to see the data coming in, which is super interesting. And in the last 5 years, since I wrote my first book, there has just been so many fascinating, really well done research studies coming in about women's health and the female biology, which a lot of that's come out of the animal studies as well.
So good. There's actually a couple of things that we'll talk about later on in the interview, but big studies that have come out since the book that have actually added to our knowledge base around thermoregulation and the hot flushes / flashes, depending on where you live in the world, and also Lisa Mosconi's research as well. So we will get there. What I wanted to bring out when we're talking about the changes that some women experience through the years of perimenopause, and I think it's important for us to kind of note that the average statistics tell us that about 20% of women are just going to sail through perimenopause with absolutely no symptoms at all or no noticeable symptoms. 20% will have symptoms that I would say are life-altering in that they're affecting their ability to turn up and be who they want to be in the world.
Yeah.
And about 60 are in the mild to moderate sort of phase.
Yep.
So, and a lot of those changes are from changes in the hormone cascade, if I'm understanding correctly, particularly to do with estrogen and where those receptors are. So can you tell me a little bit about how our brain and let's talk about the HPO axis as well, impacts the main things that people will say, and also honouring, before I actually get you to answer that question, honouring the fact that we're going to be talking about sleep, hot flushes, mood disturbances, and brain fog. They're the big ones that you mentioned in your book. There is lots of other symptoms that people can have. They tend to be less, what's the word? I guess those ones to me are the most impactful, which I guess.
And I'm a neuroscientist. We'll talk about the brain. I'm not here to talk about skin.
No, exactly.
Or joints. I don't know about them.
Yeah. Good.
Let's stay in my lane.
Please stay in your scope.
Yeah. I think before we talk about this conversation that goes on between our body and our brain, the HPO axis, I just want to step back and place that within the framework that you spoke about when you discussed the quote at the very beginning. And I think it's always important to keep this in mind, this idea that we always need to integrate a sort of a biopsychosocial approach to any of these discussions. And when it comes to the brain, I call it the bottom up, outside and top down model, whereby our brain is constantly receiving streams of data, some of which we're aware of, others we have no, conscious awareness of. So we're receiving data from our body. There's constant stream of data coming into our brain from our biology, from the outside and world, the people around us, light, dark, nature, the built environment we live in, stressful events, etc. And also, we've got this top-down influence as well because we're human. So whether we call that psychology or mind, thoughts, memories, expectations. And that's just not one-way information. There's these constant conversations, particularly between our bottom-up body and our brain.
Yes.
So if we're talking about the biology, the HPO axis, we must remember it's not in isolation from, all of these other streams of data. Yes. But it helps. I find that's quite a mechanistic kind of visual framework to sort of break down these three main sources of information that our brain is receiving. And I'm not going to get into biology. Lots of people probably covered this in high school, and you can go and open up any kind of about women's health if you want to really understand the HPO axis. But I think it's useful to frame in terms of thinking about the conversation that's constantly going on between our body, and in this case, our ovaries, which are releasing these hormones, particularly estrogen as we're going into ovulation, and then progesterone after ovulation. And, that's not separate from our brain because the signals go all through our body, doing the various things that they do.
Yes.
messages that the hormones are carrying, but they also go up into our brain. And there's sort of two components in that H and the P of the HPO axis. O is the ovaries, there's the hypothalamus, and there's the pituitary. The hypothalamus kind of sits right in the middle of the brain. It's a very, very, very busy part of the brain.
Yes.
It's receiving constant streams of information about hormones, but also about things like body temperature, other hormone signals that might be signaling things like hunger or stress or all kinds of information in their blood pH, carbon dioxide level, etc. But it's also integrating information from other parts of our brain about what's happening in the outside world and what are we thinking about what's going to happen next.
Yes.
So the hypothalamus is then directly connected to the pituitary, which releases hormones, which can then send messages back down to the ovaries.
Yes.
So we've got this constant sort of communication going on, carried by hormones between the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and the ovaries. And the hypothalamus, once it's kind of integrating all this information, then can send the signals out to the rest of our body through hormones, out to the rest of our body through our nervous system, or out to the rest of our brain where, the brain is controlling various aspects of thoughts and feelings and behaviours.
Yes. Hey gorgeous, we interrupt this gold for a delicious invitation. If your whole body has been whispering more lately, more voice, more truth, more satisfaction, more clients of the soulmate variety, more cash, more you, then this invitation is for you. Potent, my sister mind is officially open. This is my high touch, holy fuck, I'm ready sister mind for rebels in good girl clothing who are done outsourcing their power and diluting their magic to fit into someone else's business formula. If you have been craving a space where your strategy, your voice, and your energy all get to be offered, honored, refined, and amplified, this is it. Inside of Potent, you'll get my eyes on your business every single week, copy mentoring, and that is for brand copy and content storytelling that turns your truth into client catnip, energetic recalibration that helps you unhook old, learned limitation patterns, keeping you quiet, not being seen, not being heard, real-time, high-touch, one-on-one coaching that actually sees the bigness of your vision, and the kind of sisterhood that does not flinch when you show up in your full, messy, brilliant, phoenix rising from the ashes glory. This isn't surface level support. It's deep, potent, paradigm shifting work that changes who you are as a woman in business and a woman in life. We start in August. Early open access is open right now. For the month of June 2025, inside of this early access open doors period, you will receive juicy bonuses, extended payment plans, and access immediately to my entire library of storytelling gold. You'll find all the juicy details at kyliepatchett.com/potent. And we fill spaces, and there's only 10 of them, and more than likely only 5 by the time you listen to this, because by that time I will have offered them to the existing cohort, the beautiful original OG circle. We do actually take applications on a first come, first served basis. So come and apply, and let's get back to the magic of the episode. I love the fact that you're using the word conversation, because I think, I learned all this stuff a long time ago. Like my biology degree is in the 90s. Yeah, but I haven't used it since. So when I wanted to look more, I understood that I actually read a book called The Hormone Repair Manual by Lara Briden, just when I was starting to feel the first perimenopausal effects. And she goes into this super amount of detail about the HPO axis. But I think for me now, who I would describe myself as a layperson, not a scientist, just understanding it's a conversation. And that conversation is therefore then going to be impacted by the changes that happen in estrogen as soon as we start, that perimenopausal transition. And the very fact that our estrogen is literally on a roller coaster, sometimes up, sometimes down, and not in this smooth decline, which frankly would be a better design.
Yes.
If I could redesign the human, that would be. Anyway. So can you talk a little bit more about the role that estrogen plays, and why then is this estrogen roller coaster making the things happen that women most struggle with in these years?
Yeah. Good question. So if we go back to puberty, that conversation is begun by the brain. So the brain kind of has a so-called biological clock.
Yes.
Which is on that conversation, and it carries on all through your fertile years.
Yeah.
But it might be altered somewhat if you're taking the oral contraceptive pill, or if you have pregnancy, you add in a placenta, a whole new giant gland, which is releasing all of this. So hormones thousandfold, so a whole lot of other things happen then. But once you kind of start getting to the end of your reproductive years, sometime typically in your 40s, for some women earlier, some women later, the real change that starts taking place is in your ovarian reserve. And it's those changes that take place at the level of the ovary that are causing the conversation to change. It's the ripening of the eggs and the release of estrogen from the ovary. Whether or not you ovulate, you might, fire off 3 eggs a month,
and sometimes
none for a couple. So instead of it being, as for most women, but not all women, it's been reasonably secular and regular, it becomes very irregular, and and that roller coaster or irregularity is almost kind of like one of the cardinal signs of menopause. Women's length of their cycles change, the amount of bleeding or not. And you've probably talked about this endlessly with all of your other guests. But I think what's important to note here is that the levels of estrogen are fluctuating wildly each month. And so the signal that's coming through to the brain, instead of being predictable, is not predictable anymore. If we go back and zoom back into the part of the brain I was speaking about, the hypothalamus, that's where there's a great density of estrogen receptors. Now, estrogen isn't like, needs the kind of the message receiver for the message to kind of lock in. So, you're not going to be throwing estrogen around the room and, having it impact people's skin. It needs kind of something to lock into to act. And the cells in the hypothalamus, the neurons in the hypothalamus, contain a whole ton of estrogen receptors, because obviously they're the ones that control ovulation and fertility. So one of the sort of changes that we now are starting to understand most from a neuroscience level is thermoregulation in the hypothalamus. So I kind of imagine, and this is a metaphor, we don't literally have a thermostat in our hypothalamus, but we have think of it metaphorically as a thermostat, whereby the hypothalamus kind of has a set point for, your optimal temperature, and there's a high point and a low point. Your body temperature, your core body temperature, you don't really want it to fluctuate too much. You don't want to get too cold. You don't want to get too hot, because that's no good for health overall. And it turns out that in women, that thermostat is partly regulated by estrogen. So the cells that are able to receive the messages about body temperature, that are kind of set and regulated by levels of estrogen. So once the levels of estrogen start fluctuating, the thermostat, the kind of the top level and the bottom level, sort of start to move around quite a lot. So what we see is, typically, not always, but in many women, the set top point moves down a whole lot. We also see the bottom level move up a bit, but not as much. But some women are much more susceptible to the cold, not just the hot. So what happens is you might only need a tiny, tiny increase in your core body temperature for your thermostat and your hypothalamus to go, it's hot in here, it's hot in here, it's hot in here. Previously, your body may have noticed that as a tiny increase, so it would have had a small response. You may have sweated slightly, flushed slightly, or maybe thought, maybe I'll just move my jumper off or open a door. Now, the perimenopausal brain thinks that there's been an enormous increase in temperature, and it almost goes into panic mode. So it's like, it's hot in here, and it's sending messages physiologically to your body to sweat, to cool down and to go red, so your blood vessels dilate.
Yeah.
And it's also wanting to send you a little bit into panic mode. So you're also getting a bit of a kind of a noradrenaline response. And lots of women may not necessarily notice that during the day, but lots of women might notice that at night when they wake up with a hot sweat, but they're also waking up with almost in a big, panic. And that's because your brain is trying to wake your body up to cool you down because it thinks it's kind of panic stations.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So that's why the response is so extreme. It's still the same response that we would have had normally, but the tiny increase in body temperature has been perceived as a danger signal.
Yeah.
Now we know that. We know estrogen isn't, and I could, but I'm not going to get into, the sort of the biochemical pathways within the neurons and how they change and that. But we're starting to understand in a whole lot more detail, like little molecular steps that are taking place in these neurons. Now we know estrogen is involved in this process because if we replace estrogen, so women who take hormone replacement therapy, we know for a large number of women, not all, but broadly speaking, women who choose to take hormone replacement therapy, their propensity for hot flashes goes down because adding the estrogen back in resets the thermostat. So that top level can move back up into a bit more of a sort of a normal physiological range instead of panic stations.
I'm so glad that you have paired. That's been really personally helpful. And I know for a lot of people listening it will be, because I haven't had too many hot flushes. I'm just going to say hot flushes, but if you're in America, hot flashes. But I have not understood the connection between that noradrenaline spike and therefore that... because I actually had a moment yesterday. We were out on our motorbike and it's 35 degrees in Queensland at the moment, right? So it's not cool weather, but it's dry heat. And most of the time, even in that temperature with full protective gear on, we're in the country, we're not stopping at traffic lights. We're not, in dense traffic with the heat of the bitumen sort of reflecting back up on you. You're out on a country road, you've got lots of airflow. Yesterday, I had a moment on the back of the bike where I was like, I am in full panic mode. And it was because we were riding at 12. It was warm and we had been sat, speaking to someone. And I understood like the heat. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, here's one of those. And I just know that, it just passes. So just breathe through it. But the feeling of panic was really, really present with me. I was like, I'm going to have to stop, Shane. And then anyway, I ended up just going, no, just give me a couple of minutes and let me just see if I can just deep breathe my way through this. But yeah, I've never understood that connection with the peak.
Your body's trying to alert you, and particularly if you're asleep.
Yes.
You need to wake up, and women awake with the hot flash and the racing heart. And that's just your brain trying to tell your body to cool down. We need to quickly find a way to cool down.
That actually makes me think of one of the first areas of science that I worked in was sleep and respiratory medicine. And when someone has sleep apnea, so their airway collapses, or it depends on what type of apnea, but let's just go with obstructive apnea. The airway either relaxes or completely closes over. As a result, their oxygen levels start dropping, and then the respiratory drive kicks in, and they go,
and they wake up,
panic.
and it's that same spike. Yeah, you see that, and that can cause, and essentially you're putting your body into this sort of vigilance
arousal.
Hyper arousal. You're waking up, and if that's happening multiple times. So what's happening there is not just then you're associating the panic, the feeling of panic, or waking up at night suddenly wondering what's going on with just the hot flash, and you can't always then necessarily rationalize your way out of being woken up hyper aroused multiple times a night.
Yes.
And that can have knock-on effects in terms of raising your overall kind of arousal levels, and that can have knock-on effects in terms of anxiety. You can kind of see where the conversation goes from here in terms of women and menopause. So we do sort of start to see a bit of a domino effect.
Yes. And that is very similar to what we see in sleep medicine, where if someone has something that creates a pattern of insomnia, the behavioral part of that can snowball into it being almost unbreakable. Because
absolutely, and we see the same thing. We can do, and it's important. We'll talk about this in a moment, I'm sure. Between thermoregulation and sleep.
Yes,
but insomnia, again, we've got to consider it from a bottom-up, outside-in, top-down perspective. And insomnia also becomes a psychological issue that needs to be dealt with. And one of the best treatments, that we have, or certainly the clinical practice guidelines would say, CBT for insomnia, which isn't just about getting you to think your way out of insomnia and challenging your thoughts, but it's your behaviors. It's about taking that much more holistic approach and understanding that you will develop a bit of a psychological response and almost expectation of insomnia, which will feed the insomnia, even if it's not intentional.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've seen that plays out in respiratory medicine. It's not dissimilar to what we see here with the impact of night sweats and hot flashes.
It's interesting. I just did specific training in yoga for the stages of menopause, and we talked about the CBT for insomnia, but also separating that out, hot flushes in waking hours as well. And really what I took away from that, which is exactly what you're saying, it's almost like there's a physiological response happening, and then that can be snowballed by the story we make about it. So if you're waking up and then you're going, oh my God, I'm awake again, I'm going to be awake for 3 hours, I'm not going to be able to cope with this interview with Sarah tomorrow morning, that sort of thing, it does actually make it worse and worse and worse. So
and there's been some research done on using CBT to help women with hot flashes who've gone through breast cancer treatment who can't take, because of their genetic profile or the reasons for their breast cancer, they can't take supplements, the estrogen, for example. So what can we do to help those women? And CBT is useful. It's not removing the hot flashes. It's not that you've thought your way into a hot flash, but it helps you find ways to not catastrophize a hot flash. So instead of feeling the panic and worrying what everyone's thinking of you and almost developing a psychological kind of state around the hot flash, you learn how to kind of, psychologically manage that.
Live with.
Calm way, even if you're not feeling cool.
Correct. Yes. Amazing, which is then just comes back to, what did you call that before when you were saying bottom up, top down,
bottom up? You've got your bottom up biology, outside in, and top down, and they're always, and it's just a way of, and I always have a very visual kind of representation of it. There's a diagram at the front of the book, I think in chapter 1 of the book, which the in utero section of the book, which kind of talks about that, because whenever we talk about menopause or insomnia or anxiety or anything like that from the perspective of the brain, we can't go, oh, it's all hormones, or it's all rumination, or it's all that stressful event that happened yesterday. All of these messages are coming into the brain, and the brain's kind of making meaning and piecing together a story from them. What
you used a word though to summarize that. You said biopsychosocial model.
Okay, the biopsychosocial model is a term used broadly speaking within health to talk about all the influences. I've kind of turned it into a format to think about the brain and kind of a frameworky way, instead of kind of Venn diagrams, here's the brain in the middle, and it just gives you a visual representation.
I found it really helpful when I was reading the book, because I was like, okay, so we're not just, because when I was in sleep medicine, one of the things that really irritated me about conventional science, and particularly in a hospital setting, was that our patients would see a sleep or a thoracic physician usually, so sleep, someone who specializes in sleep. Then they would go down the hall and see a cardiologist separately. Then they would go and see, psychiatrist/psychologist separately. And to me, it doesn't make sense I know that there's areas of medicine that are specialties that need to be separate, but if we're not looking at the whole picture, then we're not bringing in all the ways that we can influence something.
It's hard. It's the onus is put back on the patient to be the kind of the specialist.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, not the specialist, the generalist.
Yeah, the generalist.
And we've got our GPs, but they are flogged. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's hard. I think I mean, not that it should solely be on each individual, but if you have the capacity to be able to gather the information from the different modalities, whether it's a book or whether it's a specialist. It's useful if you are the kind of person that's able to do that, and some people are really capable of that, but there's plenty of people who just simply are overwhelmed and can't.
I think
it's a real problem.
Being able to understand and advocate and be able to communicate from in between one specialist to another can definitely be a challenge. having kids that have multiple special genes.
Absolutely. And even people who are really, well versed in navigating the healthcare system find it incredibly difficult. So
yeah, I certainly have. Okay, I want to come back to, so you were talking about studies before we started recording, and you were talking about the estrogen thermoregulation studies. So have we gone down the path of capturing all of that and what we've just talked about, or is there other things that we've discovered about sleep and thermoregulation?
Well, I think what's interesting is we are now understanding how intimately entwined, it's all linked.
Yes.
And any neuroscientist will, has been advocating for that for decades.
Yes.
That thermoregulation impacts sleep, and anyone going through perimenopause will be like, well, duh, of course.
Yeah.
But what we're now starting to understand is people are probably also familiar, let's just add in another neurohormone here, melatonin, which is released from our pineal gland in response to darkness falling, so the lack of light. And when it gets dark, many people don't like it getting dark, and they like to turn lights on or TVs or screens at nighttime. But we're all probably familiar with that story. When it gets dark, melatonin is released from our pineal gland in our body.
Yes.
And it's not like some kind of sleeping pill that makes you fall asleep. It is released into your bloodstream, and it has widespread physiological effects which prepare your body for sleep. And one of the most important roles that it plays is in thermoregulation.
Yes.
And that is one of the things that our body must do. And as someone who's previously, familiar with sleep, you may be familiar with this idea that you need to drop your body temperature slightly to be able to fall asleep. And that's why if it's a hot night, sleep in a cool room. If it's a cold night, have a warm shower, because what you want is that drop in body temperature, and that's what helps you fall asleep. Melatonin plays a large part in that. It helps you release the heat from the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet.
Yeah.
If you're already very, very cold, you haven't got the buildup of heat to release to help you fall asleep. So if it's a cold night and you go to bed cold, you stay cold, you'll find it hard to fall asleep.
Yeah.
That's why you're recommended to warm up first. And that's why animals on cold nights often curl up into a really tight ball, because they're trying to conserve as much body heat so that it can then release. And it's the release of the heat that helps you fall asleep. Similarly, if it's a really, really hot night and you've got no way to cool your room down, you can't throw the heat off from your body. You can't lose body heat out into the room.
Yeah.
So you don't get the drop in temperature, so you don't fall asleep. Yeah. Melatonin regulates that process too. Yes. Melatonin isn't a sleeping pill. It helps regulate your body temperature.
Yep.
So what happens when we are going through perimenopause and our thermoregulation is kind of getting a bit out of whack?
Yeah.
What's happening to our sleep, not just at the beginning of the night with falling asleep, but our sleep architecture through the whole night. And they are the kind of steps you go through. I'm speaking to the expert here.
No, but we haven't talked about it before.
But we've got these different stages of sleep that we go through. We fall into deep sleep initially in the first stages of the night and stay there, and then kind of go into lighter sleep and deeper sleep again throughout the night. And there's a reasonably healthy pattern of sleep, we call it sleep architecture, that you would like to see. That is influenced by body temperature. What happens if your body temperature is all out of whack? We start to see sleep architecture changing quite significantly. Yes. And this is important perhaps not just so much for women who are being woken at night, consciously woken at night by hot flashes, but it may be you're not being consciously woken, but your sleep architecture is disrupted.
Yes.
So you might not necessarily know, you might not have a memory of waking up in the night, with the bed soaked in sweat, but you perhaps were not getting, the hours that you required in deep sleep because your body temperature is kind of out of whack. So we're now seeing that link between the changes in estrogen, the thermostat and the hypothalamus, and sleep architecture, and then the outcome. So what happens if you have one terrible night's sleep? You've talked about it a couple of times already. So it's obviously impacted your functioning today.
Yeah.
What happens if you have even mildly disrupted sleep day after day, week after week, month after month?
Yeah.
You're going to inevitably see some of these other effects in terms of cognition, in terms of emotional regulation.
Yeah, definitely.
Start to be disrupted too.
Yeah.
I just love the fact that you've used the word sleep architecture. I haven't heard those words for such a long time. As you're saying, you can sleep for a whole night, but just wake up feeling fatigued or like you're not refreshed. And a similar thing happens.
We see that with, if people drink alcohol, too much alcohol late at night, sleep architecture is disrupted. So you might think you were asleep for 8 hours, but you weren't going through the healthy phase of sleep. So you wake up the next day not feeling great. Maybe you haven't got a hangover, but your sleep was disrupted. People who are taking various sleep medications for whatever reasons aren't going through those healthy stages of sleep. Now, there's lots of really good reasons why people may need sleep medication at different points in their lifespan. But if you're relying that night after night, you're not going through those stages of sleep architecture. They can also be disrupted by ambient light in your room, people who are doing shift work. And of course, if you've ever had a baby, how easily disrupted your sleep gets by that cute little person who's now part of your family. So, there's lots of reasons why that can be disrupted. And we all have the experience of the knock-on effects, even if it's that kind of mild, kind of almost under the radar disruption. That may be one of the contributing factors to why many women are, feeling this brain fog or feeling this kind of inability to regulate their emotions as well. Sleep may be kind of underlying it all. Maybe. Not always, but maybe.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it is a cumulative factor. And I'm just remembering, and again, I need to say this with the caveat of this is, back in the 90s when I worked in this field of science. So there is more than likely been lots more research. And I know that there's been lots more research, but there's good evidence to say that the cumulative effect of lack of good quality sleep architecture, and in particular slow wave sleep, where all of our healing and restoration and all of the magic happens. And also actually back then, so the first half of the night, our sleep architecture tends to have more slow wave sleep, which is the cell regeneration, resting, all the physical sort of repair. When I was in sleep, the second half of the night, this is not just when I'm in sleep. Sleep architecture-wise, you have more dream sleep or rapid eye movement sleep.
And lighter sleep,
Correct, exactly. And it was thought in those days, and interesting, I'm not sure if you do know the answer to this or not, but in those days, we've never really understood the mechanism or the purpose behind REM sleep. But one of the things that was being proposed and thrown around was it helped us to make sense of our day. So it's when we store things in our unconscious, we sort things out, we, process emotion, etc. And so that dream sleep is that, do you know?
And there's studies have gone, you can go in there and you can wake people at different, deprive them of wave sleep, deprive them of REM sleep, and see where are the greatest impacts.
Yes.
And we know now a whole lot of it's around memory consolidation. You were probably still talking about that back then, but we kind of now have zoomed in and understand a little bit more about the neurobiology of how these kind of waves of activity that are going through the brain are helping consolidate memories. And you kind of need both phases. But interestingly, it's much more damaging to disrupt the early phases of deep sleep than the later phases of REM sleep. And if you think about you or any listeners, and I remember what it was like when my babies were little. If you put the baby to sleep and then you went to sleep straight away and they woke at 1 a.m. but you went to sleep at 8, you've already had 5 hours sleep. You've probably gone through your phases of deep sleep.
Absolutely.
You get woken up. Or if you've gone to bed at 9, 10, the baby wakes at 4, you're in your lighter phase of sleep. It's not that hard to wake up. You can probably get by.
Yes.
But if you put the baby down, you go into that deep, deep sleep and the baby wakes up an hour later. It is so hard to get up out of that sleep. It's like, pulling yourself up from the bottom of a swimming pool.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's far more disruptive to the next day.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of work being done now on how can we help new mothers particularly consolidate those first kind of hours of sleep. Calling the cavalry is essentially what it comes down to once breastfeeding's established, if that's what you've chosen to do, of course. But understanding about how important it is to protect the early phases of sleep. The lighter phases of sleep later on aren't going to have the same impact, increased risk of mental health from sleep deprivation, etc. So if we can, the advice is if you put the baby down, try and go to sleep then as well. You don't need to do housework or whatever. It's far more important that you try and get a good solid block of sleep before the baby awakes. And if the baby wakes, get some help in to help consolidate deep sleep, because that's far more disruptive than the sleep later in the night.
Yeah. Can we go down the track of some of the mood changes that can happen as a result of this estrogen roller coaster? I'm just going to keep calling it because that makes sense to me.
I think, you know, the line that you read from the book at the beginning, that, you know, it's when our bottom-up biology kind of makes us more vulnerable to some of these other influences. So there's different, you know, so which is the loudest voice in the crowd? It's not always hormones, or it's not always stressful events. It's not always rumination. It's the collision of all of these. But certainly when we go through these enormous life changes, this is an enormous phase of neurological reorganization. We can look at women's brains before, during, and after that perimenopause phase, and we can see significant structural changes taking place.
Amazing.
We see significant metabolic changes taking place, and they kind of parallel all these other changes that we do see. Women are becoming, we are more vulnerable to develop a lot of these disorders based on this kind of coalescence of factors. The disruptive sleep is an enormous part of that, but sort of sitting alongside that is our general health more broadly. How much care are you taking of nutrition? How much care are you taking of exercise? All of the other kind of things.
All the fundamentals.
We've really got to double down on them when we go through these big life transitions. Similarly, when we go through pregnancy and early motherhood. Similarly, when we go through an incredibly stressful phase, when we were going through, the pandemic lockdowns, and, the entire world or neighborhood or wherever you were was going through this incredibly sort of stressful event, and everyone's much more vulnerable. Stress is often the trigger for this. When we go through these phases of life when we're vulnerable, and one of these is menopause, then we've kind of got to double down on all of the basics to build up that resilience, to give ourselves the best chance to kind of get through the other side.
I think for me, I've talked about this a lot on this show. One of the first, I turned 47 and I was completely oblivious to the possibility that I might sooner or later be going into perimenopause. It wasn't something that I really spent much time thinking about. But the very first thing that I noticed was these swings in mood from rage, that's the only way I can describe it, to crying. And I was like, am I having a psychotic break? What is wrong with me? And I think for us to be aware that there can be mood changes and psychological, changes. And I also have to honor the fact that I was also going through something incredibly stressful with one of my parents and one of my daughters at the same time. So as you're saying, you're being squashed in all of the directions.
and at this phase of life, we are being squashed, as you say, from all directions. And it's easy to hang our hat on hormones.
Yes.
But we can't necessarily do a lot about them. I mean, you could choose hormone therapy if that's what you want to do.
Yes.
But we must also, honour the fact that there can be a lot of other pressures in place. And that happens at every point. That kind of 20-60-20 trajectory, we see that when we see children going through adolescence, women entering motherhood, how people cope with the pandemic. Vast majority of people will probably kind of come through okay, unscathed, but it was a bit tough. Some people it's completely flawed. The mother's almost like it never happened. That kind of trajectory is pretty common, and we can't always necessarily predict in advance.
Yes.
But women going through perimenopause, if you have been susceptible to hormone fluctuations in the past, or that you don't cope well with stress or uncertainty, or that perhaps there are some tweaks that you could be making to your diet, your exercise, or your sleep, it's wise to kind of, prepare in advance as much as you can.
Yes. I think that really is where I feel like the education piece and being forewarned, there's a lot of things that we can do to influence all of those things. And like you're saying, double down rather than, hitting perimenopause, living on coffee and chocolate and in a super stressful job and not asking for help and not, with no rest time and no sleep and no, that's just going to be.
And I kind of think if you get to your late 40s and you're not going to put your big girl pants on and sort of start taking care of yourself and advocating for yourself, I'm not sure when you're going to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because your mum's not there to do it for you, probably.
Yeah, I know, right?
Necessarily. Some of us are lucky enough to still have our mums there, but my mum lives in New Zealand and she's not You know, she's got a lot of other things going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I think we need to take a bit of ownership and retain a agency as well.
Agreed.
That comes from self-education too.
In the book, you talk about so some of the things that you talk about is that if you have been undergoing mood changes, your chances of doing that can be linked to, as you say, susceptibility to hormone changes, a history of PMDD, depression previously.
Mm-hmm.
You also say that it can include emotional flatness, feeling unable to cope, which I like to call acopia. I don't even know what that's. Irritability, social isolation, tearfulness, decreased energy, and failure to enjoy normal activities. You also then go on to say, which I found really interesting, that there is research, and I apologize in advance if I get this name incorrectly pronounced. So Jayashri Kulkarni says that perimenopausal mood disorders are not well recognized and wrongly treated with antidepressants. And she goes on to say women with this type of depression generally respond better to hormone treatments, but the link between depression and hormones is not often made. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because
So I'm not a clinician, obviously, and
no, of course,
Kulkarni is. She's a women's health physician.
Yes.
I believe she might even be an OBGYN in Melbourne. I did speak to her on that, and she's seeing a specific clinical subset of patients as well.
Yeah, of course.
She's a women's health psychiatrist. Let me get that right.
Oh, okay.
Who,
so definitely,
you know, obviously she's seeing women at the end of their tether.
Yes.
And I suppose it depends where in the world you are, who the health professionals are you're talking to, how well recognised the various symptoms women can experience going through perimenopause are, whether or not it's perceived and diagnosed and therefore treated as depression, or whether, you know, you've got a doctor who's happier to sort of have a look at what else may be going on. And it could be depression. Yeah. It could just be pure standard depression. And you perhaps you've got a lifetime of depression leading up to that point. Yes. And that's what we see as women who are already at risk. Similarly, if you've suffered from a lot of depression through your lifespan, you're going to be more at risk of postnatal depression. Yeah. You're going to be at more at risk of developing depression in an incredibly stressful event like the pandemic, or someone perhaps in your family being unwell or dying, or menopause. Yeah. So just sort of think about it in those terms. Some women say that they were diagnosed with depression when it was menopausal symptoms. And when I spoke to Dr. Kulkarni back then, she certainly perceived that more women were being diagnosed with mental health disorders when what was underlying that were menopausal changes, and they should have been addressed first. Yeah. And that's a hard, some doctors would say that the opposite, that women are being overtreated.
Yeah, that's right.
Everyone's been given HRT and we're not looking at what perhaps else might be going on in some women. So it's a blanket statement. I don't necessarily know whether it's still the case now as it was back in 2016, 17 when she made that statement.
I guess for me, again, not a clinician, not a doctor, but I would be saying that if it is something that is affecting your ability to cope in life, seek some medical assistance and, feel through, and you're right, depending on what GP you go to, where you are in the world, what sort of, familiarity with this specific, changes, then you're going to get different responses, I would imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And that's when, sometimes women are really left struggling to advocate for themselves or to get the help they need.
Yes.
And if you've kind of got the wherewithal to do that, then that's when I say, you've got to be a big girl, because no one else is going to be doing it for you at this stage. Yes. And there are a wealth of resources out there online if you're the kind of person that wants to go and look for that. There is a ton of information, available. From the Australian Menopause Society, Jean Hales for Women's Health. They have so many resources out there to kind of give women that sort of basic education and, something to take along to have a discussion with, and having a good relationship here in Australia with your GP. Yes. It's so important.
Yeah, definitely. I lucked onto my original doctor left, and when I just started noticing all of these things, I lucked onto this amazing older lady doctor who only works a couple of days a week, but she's one of those people that still will sit and really listen. And I feel very very heard, but also she's got a huge amount of experience in women's health. So I feel like, you know, that I'm talking to the right person.
Yeah. You've got to hold on to them. I had a terrible experience with a GP a couple of years ago who I just went to get I'm on the oral contraceptive pill, just went to get a new prescription. She was just a prescription doctor. I didn't see my amazing GP who I've seen for years. I thought, it's the pandemic. I won't overload people. I'll just go to the prescription doctor. And she asked me if I had any contraindications for being on the pill. And I said, well, I have migraines, but I've been on the pill since I was 23. So I'm all right. And she wouldn't write a new prescription for me. And I was furious because she was, and not was because she was young, but because I felt like I had my agency removed.
Yes. Yeah.
I know what I'm doing here. I've been doing this for 25 years. You don't know me. And then she took and we kind of got into a bit of an argument, and then she took blood pressure. And my blood pressure, was really high.
Of course it was.
And I stood up and I said, I don't think this is being of any help to anyone. And I stood up and walked out. She rang me.
Oh.
And said she was very concerned about my high blood pressure.
Oh, my goodness.
And wanted me to go and buy a blood pressure monitor and monitor my blood pressure daily because it was at such a... And I was like, the sort of the sequence of events that led to her calling me to tell me my blood pressure was too high and it was of concern was just ridiculous. So, and that would have, and then, so I went back and made an appointment with my usual GP.
Yes.
Had a nice chat. She asked me how my boys were. She wrote the script. We had a chat and I was on my way. Yeah. And that just shows, I think, the importance of having someone that you know and like and knows you
absolutely.
And trust and have a proper conversation with versus this crazy, sort of sequence of events that occurred with someone I didn't know.
And also acknowledging that other people could go through that and be completely flummoxed, whereas you have got the understanding of your rights and
someone and telling them ringing someone and telling them to go and buy a blood pressure monitor. I mean, that's not useful for a lot of people. Won't even know how to take blood pressure,
exactly,
or what's high or what's low, or how to monitor it daily and what that means, and can you afford to go and spend $100 at the pharmacy on one?
Exactly.
The whole situation was just quite ridiculous and just highlighted to me the importance of a good relationship.
I love my doctor.
I love mine too.
And yes, it is a bit inconvenient sometimes. She's only there 2 days a week, but I don't often need to go. And when I want to go, it's because I've got something, meaty to discuss anyway. So it's usually something I can wait to see. So what we haven't gotten to yet is the brain fog, cognition, word finding things that can sometimes turn up for people. And I also I'd love to touch on what you speak about in the book about some people can mistakenly think that they're suffering from early onset dementia. So let's go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, and that's really kind of that was the sort of the story that started my whole foray into sort of women's brain health, was writing this article on brain fog, which is a colloquial term, which that's the kind of thing someone would turn up. That's not a medical diagnosis, but saying and it can mean different things to different people. It can mean sort of fuzzy or forgetful, or the inability to pay attention, word finding ability. We were talking before this about substituting the wrong word in, calling your child the wrong name, the whole host of things that can fall in under that umbrella of brain fog. And when it comes to sort of this perimenopause, menopause stage, again, there's a whole lot of things that could be the cause of that. We've talked about estrogen and sleep and thermoregulation, but we do see quite significant structural reorganisation of the brain going on. Interestingly, during puberty and then again during pregnancy, when we're seeing these increases of all of these hormones, we actually see the grey matter of certain regions of the brain become slightly thinner. So they become kind of refined, streamlined as they get better at doing what they're meant to do. And we often see the brain streamline and kind of reduce the amount of work it needs to do as it gets better at something. When we go through menopause, what we see is the grey matter almost kind of bounces back. So we see increases in women's grey matter as they go through that perimenopause stage, almost like the growing of wisdom.
The blossoming.
The blossoming. So it's kind of the grey matter bounce back slightly during, which is interesting because it's the opposite of what we see during pregnancy and
that's fascinating.
And puberty. So it grows. So, you're not like dementia and Alzheimer's disease would be characterized anatomically by the exact opposite, by the
Exactly.
way.
Yes.
So, it's not from a pure let's scan your brain perspective. You've not got dementia. We're actually seeing more grey matter. But what we are seeing is quite a significant reorganisation. And as the brain goes through these stages of reorganisation, that could partly be due to, what is going on. The brain's kind of resettling into a new pattern, or it's downloading a new way of managing. But we also do see this kind of change through that phase, that point in time. And we do sort of see it not necessarily recover slightly, but go through a bit of a change in metabolic capability. So the brain has to work kind of a little bit harder to metabolize glucose, a little bit harder to kind of, do its job from a metabolic sort of state.
Okay.
We see that in every cell in the body. You're far more vulnerable to develop type 2 diabetes because of changes in glucose metabolism.
Yeah.
Than before, and we see that in all of the parts of the brain. So there's a bit of a metabolic shift. The brain has to work harder to be able to perform the same job as it did earlier. We see this structural change, and at the same time, all of these brain regions that are involved in thinking and feeling have estrogen receptors, and the estrogen's going up and down if you're going through the sort of natural menopause. So it's hard at this stage for neuroscientists to be able to tease out what's going on.
Gotcha.
But by and large, if women say, I'm sort of suffering from these problems, we can say it's kind of normal.
Yes.
But what we do often see is that once everything settles down, so to speak, perhaps after you've gone through perimenopause, a year or two into menopause, we often see things sort of flatline, and the brain almost kind of get used to its new state and then function within that. There are a ton of different factors which can protect or make you more vulnerable to these. So if you're fit and healthy and doing all of the right things, plus you're very cognitively engaged, perhaps you're one of these sort of like an intellectual, you may be protected against that. But by the same token, you might also notice tiny changes that other women might not. And so the example I give in the book, which came from a reproductive physician who works within the menopause space, a chap called John Eden, I assume he's still around, said that he often sees it in lawyers because they rely so much on this kind of linguistic gymnastics that they need to do, the ability to find precise words and be able to use them in really clever ways quite quickly. They may be, in the court or something. And, that tiny, perhaps cognitive drop that they're seeing, or the ability to manipulate words very quickly and carefully, you might see a lower drop. Someone who's, not working as a lawyer and it doesn't really matter, might not notice that. So, there's a lot of kind of things in play there in terms of what are causing those changes, and also what women perceive as a foggy brain.
Yes.
And I often joke, and this is not to brush it off, but my teenage boys, have to go to school every day, and every day they can't find their tie and their school bag, and once a week they leave something behind or leave something on a school bus, and we have to go to the depot and find the lost item. And I'm not attributing that, they don't have brain fog. They're not attributing it to baby brain or menopause. We all forget stuff when we're not paying attention. I just think sometimes at different points in the lifespan, we are looking for something to hang a hat on. That's the cause. I'll put my hat on that hook. So part of it is also, I'm not dismissing it, part of it's also the perception that we have about the capability of our brain to perform.
Yes. Yeah. It's a similar sort of thing as what we were talking about with the sleep disturbance before. And as you're talking, I'm actually going, I definitely had a story about the fact that I didn't sleep as well last night. And I do feel like I'm not as sharp as what I usually would be. But yes, I'm totally relating to what you're saying about, can we really, I guess, pathologize brain fog, or self-diagnosed brain fog?
If it's an issue, it's an issue. But do we see it as a pathology in the brain? No.
Correct. Yes.
But we do see structural changes taking place in the brain, but that's kind of part of that. And it's a neurological transition. Yeah. And we see it anatomically, we see it metabolically, and for some women it plays out functionally
Yeah.
But in a whole host of different ways. And in some women, it may play out and they may just not care. It might not be an issue. Whereas other women, those tiny changes that are around for an amount of time may be incredibly disruptive to their work. So that's why that top-down, we've got a lot of changes, but your top-down perspective, your perception, your expectation of those changes are as important to the health outcome.
Yeah.
As anything. That's another voice crowd there.
Fascinating. I know we are very, very, very over time. I want to ask one final question. Before we started recording, you were mentioning new research since you wrote this book from Lisa Mosconi about structural and metabolic changes. Have you covered that already? Or
broadly speaking, the idea that, we'd see these quite significant structural changes taking place between, pre, peri, and post menopause.
Mm-hmm.
So she's gone in and scanned the structure. She's taken photos of women's brains, and we can see that these regions of grey matter, which is kind of the wrinkly outer covering, are kind of getting slightly thicker, which is really interesting. We don't really know what that means.
Yeah.
We are seeing changes in metabolism in the brain, so it's kind of dialing down a bit.
Yes.
And we think that that's all to do with these sort of fluctuations. But we see this kind of big change take place, and then it almost kind of levels out.
Yeah.
And the brain's pretty resilient if it's healthy. So, and it's, that's with this whole plasticity is just kind of a different word for resilience in a way. The brain readjusts and reorganizes and kind of finds a new way. And, we can provide it with all the support it needs as it readjusts. We haven't even talked about hormone replacement therapy. And
I know, that's somewhere that I wanted to go.
Changes all of these things. And I mean, that's a really big kind of topic in its own, because obviously these changes are all wrought by the roller coastering and then the loss of ovarian hormones, but hormone replacement therapy keeps them in play.
Yes. Do you, given that we've just opened up that can of HRT worms,
do it quickly?
And yes, let's do it quickly. So in previous studies that have contributed to influencing whether HRT is well prescribed or not, or prescribed a lot or not, there has been studies where HRT has not been started in the right window of time, and therefore the studies have not been really that helpful. There's new studies now that have, can you explain the HRT in the right window concept and then what we know from that?
Yep, sure. So the kind of the fear and hysteria, and I don't mean hysteria in a dismissive way, but it was.
Yeah, it was.
There was a massive response back in 2002 when the Women's Health Study and a number of other studies that have been going for a number of years looking at the role of HRT in women's health outcomes, everything from breast cancer to osteoporosis to dementia appeared to show that there was an increased risk of many poor health outcomes for women who were taking HRT.
Yes.
And hit the headlines, and about 50% of the women globally, so millions and millions and millions of women, stopped taking HRT immediately.
Yes.
And then there was a generation of women who were too scared to start taking it.
Mm-hmm.
Since gone back, that data has been reanalyzed in a whole lot more detail. It's really hard to unroll fear, though.
I know, sorry.
And what we have learned is that many of those women were started on types of HRT or formulations of hormone therapy that may not necessarily have been suitable for them. Or more importantly, many of the women were started on hormone therapy in their 60s and 70s.
Yes.
So many of them were started a decade or more after they'd gone through menopause. And what we now understand is if you've weaned a system off estrogen and then you kind of add it back in 10 years later, that's when you see the increased health risk.
Yes.
But if you kind of I like to think about it as if you keep estrogen in the system the whole time, then you don't see the increased health risk. And the increase in all of these terrible health outcomes that people were very worried about was not seen in women who perhaps started taking hormone replacement therapy during perimenopause to treat symptoms or within the first year or two after their menopause. The increased risk was by and large in these older women. You start taking HRT for the first time at 70, has a much worse health outcome. Women who was taking it at that right age and the right formulation, then we didn't see that risk. I think what's important is we understand that it's really super useful for treating hot flashes, and then you may not then get that domino effect of impacting sleep
and therefore
knock-on effects of other
as we've talked about
things. Obviously, not all women want to take it. Maybe they're still freaking out from 2002.
I still hear that.
That's a public health education message that needs to be kind of rewritten for lots of women, or that story needs to be told again. But I think that I'm hearing that message quite commonly now.
Yes.
I think my generation of women in their late 40s is hearing the correct message. Women 10 years older than me is still like, no way am I watching that.
Yeah, definitely.
And then obviously there's, everyone's an individual. Most studies, could look at 100,000 women. There's 100,000 women in there. We can say, broadly speaking, this is what happened on average.
Yes.
There's always going to be outliers in individual cases. And there's many women who can't, for many health reasons, take HRT. Perhaps they've had estrogen-positive breast cancer, for example. So taking estrogen will just increase their risk.
It's not,
So they are unfortunately left to kind of, without the hormone therapy to help with the menopausal symptoms and having to do all of the other things.
Yes.
I suppose from the perspective of the brain, the big question for many, many years has been, does HRT cause dementia? Does it increase the risk of dementia? Alzheimer's disease being one type of dementia.
Yes.
Does it have absolutely no impact, or does it reduce your risk? So is it good to take? Is it bad to take, or is it neutral? And there's a lot of big studies that have come in that are kind of looking at that. We know it's pretty safe to say it doesn't cause dementia, so it is not in any way increasing your risk.
Yes.
And that fits by and large with the idea that estrogen is neuroprotective.
Yes.
We have really good research to show that the more babies a woman has, up to about 4 babies, because each pregnancy gives you 1,000-fold dose of estrogen than you get in the entire rest of your lifespan.
It's amazing, isn't it? That's
so the more, if you have up to 4 babies, after more than 4, it becomes all too stressful, and the effects of birth. Women are kind of protected, slightly protected against dementia. Now, whether it's the dose of estrogen or the other parts of parenting, we also have evidence that women who've been on the pill for most of their reproductive lifespan, so they've always had consistently high levels of estrogen, are also protected against dementia. We think at this stage, the data for HRT only is reasonably neutral. It's not. It's definitely not causing it. Should you be taking HRT to protect against dementia? We don't have that evidence in, so that's not one of the indications for HRT. But it's certainly not a contraindication. So at the moment, we think it's pretty safe. Don't need to worry about dementia if you're on HRT or not. And we know that it actually decreases the risk of a lot of other health issues, osteoporosis being a really big one.
Yes.
Obviously, it's helping you with your sleep and your thermoregulation, but it also decreases risk of lots of other cancers. So, there's, at the moment, the bulk of the data certainly seems to say, in terms of your brain, might not necessarily be take it because it's good for you, but it's not doing harm.
Yes. Amazing. I would reiterate to everyone listening, if you're thinking about the HRT end of things, make sure that you're talking to someone that is experiencing women's health, and the Australian Menopause Society and the Jean Hales site, which I'll link in the show notes, are extremely helpful in breaking down all of the research and saying, okay, this is what we do know, this is what we can't say, and these are the things that you need to be considering in your personal circumstances.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because everyone has completely different risk factors.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we've got some really good data now that people can take and understand and then use. Yeah. But that's when you need your good healthcare professional to work with.
Absolutely, yeah.
Sometimes they're a bit like gold dust.
They are. They are. Oh, my goodness. Okay, last question, because I really, really would like to know. You're writing a book, the Baby Brain book, which is funny because you kind of said, I don't believe in that. Can you give us a little idea of basically what it covers and then also when it's out, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, well, it's out in April 2023. I'll tell you the title.
Okay, go for it.
Kind of sums it up. So it's Baby Brain. And, whatever you take Baby Brain to mean, the surprising neuroscience of how pregnancy and motherhood sculpt our brains.
Yes.
Change our minds for the better.
Yes.
So I think for a long time, baby brains have been a bit like brain fog. If we consider women and brains, we think about either baby brains, so you lose your mind, you become forgetful and useless, and that's it. It's almost as if you enter pregnancy, and you know, pick up all the pregnancy books and they'll chop women off, and then it's, you know, in the head,
you are an incubator.
You know, it's like, let's just have a picture of you and your bump. You know, your head doesn't matter anymore. Your brain's gone. Off it goes. Or even if you use the words postpartum and brain, I mean, you automatically just have depression, anxiety, and there's never anything good. And when I was writing my first book, this amazing study came out, which has almost changed my life, and I think changed the field, showing that there were the most significant structural changes that take place in women's brains are during their first pregnancy. And we now understand a whole lot more about when and why and what's driving that, and it's largely the hormones during the third trimester. But the parts of the brain which were changing were the social brain, the parts of the brain involved with social cognition, with empathy, with being able to read and understand what other people need, and this ability to be able to understand your baby and who they are and what they need and want. So the brain changes, and how your brain functions changes too during that first pregnancy. The baby brain, that colloquial term about forgetfulness, is super interesting because about 4 out of 5 women will say that they have baby brain either during pregnancy or in the first few years of motherhood. I never had it, but I'd never heard about it either. And it's interesting because I surveyed a lot of people for the book, and I've got a lot of the results of the survey and quotes in there. And there was a few other women who said, well, I never had that. I went through medical school, says one woman, and I did this exam and that exam, and I never had baby brain, but I never knew I was meant to have baby brain. So there's part of it is this perception of, is it driven by our biology? Is it this inevitable cognitive decline, or is there something else in play? And there's just been this wealth of research in this space showing that, you know, if you go and you do cognitive tests in the research lab, the only time we do see any true lowering in test scores in some women by a tiny bit is during the third trimester. And that's also when we're seeing this significant reorganization taking place. That's interesting because we're seeing something similar in menopause. We're seeing massive structural reorganization taking place. Perhaps the brain just kind of needs to catch up on itself a little bit.
But also, as you're talking, the third trimester, I couldn't sleep properly because I had, you know, so.
But you also can't sleep when the baby arrives.
True.
And we don't pick the cognitive the test scores drop. I shouldn't say cognitive decline because it's not. And some of the test scores drop slightly. It might be you've got a bunch of pregnant women and get them to remember a list of 10 digits and recite them backwards, and non-pregnant women, and there might be a difference of 1 digit. So it's not a lot. It's not Alzheimer's disease level forgetfulness. It is just slight changes that we can pick up. But what we do see is there's quite a significant correlation between women's perception of their baby brain and their overall well-being. So women who experience lower well-being, who are also more vulnerable to, you know, depression, anxiety, and perhaps don't have the same degree of social support, they perceive themselves to have more baby brain symptoms than women who are healthy, well, and have a lot of social support, who are also protected against some of these other, you know, anxiety and postnatal depression, etc. So it's all kind of tied in there. But we do see these extraordinary increases in memory for things that really matter. So studies that have been done looking at getting women to remember like baby items, like, you know, nappies or strollers or things that really matter to after a new baby. We've got an increased memory for them than women who are going through pregnancy, unsurprisingly. So it's almost as if women have been saying, oh, I'm forgetful. And so we run these cognitive tests and we go, well, we don't really think you are, but we've never looked at testing them on, you know, outside of the sort of the standardized test that you would cognitive lab. You wouldn't expect, the example I give in the book is, we wouldn't test to see if sheep become better at you know, the ability to chase down and catch mice to feed to their young because a sheep isn't going to get better at that, but a sheep gets much better at recognizing smell as soon as it's had a baby, a ewe, because that's how it recognizes its baby. But a mouse gets a whole lot better at predation and remembering how to navigate its way through a maze to find the seeds to bring back to feed itself, to feed the babies. But it's not necessarily getting better at remembering the price of the stroller on the website when it was looking at, you know, price comparison.
Because it's not important.
Because a mouse isn't doing that because it's not important. We've kind of got to we've got to start thinking about, you know, these sort of species-specific behaviours and what's important to each of these new mothers, and sort of testing them. And so I kind of talk a little bit about that, and then a whole host of other wonderful changes that take place in our brains that last a lifetime. So we can look at midlife women, and we can look at elderly women, and we could see these sort of traces of pregnancy and childbirth retained in their brains, and their brains are even slightly younger looking. Women in their 80s will have slightly younger looking brains if they've had children versus women who haven't. So
this is just fascinating.
Baby brains a whole lot more than a bit of forgetfulness.
Yeah.
In fact, I think our brains and our minds change for the better.
Yeah. That's what, as you're speaking, all I'm hearing is nature knows best, and all of these things.
Mother Nature. Yeah, Mother Nature knew what she was doing. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of bottom up, outside, and top down in there as well. I talk about maternal instinct. Is that a thing? And again, interestingly, a sheep learns to recognize the smell of its little baby lamb as it's born really, really quickly. So there's an instinct there, but not every sheep does it perfectly. There's lots of orphaned lambs, and we sort of we see that as, do we all know how to look after a baby the moment it's born? No, not necessarily, but our brains have been primed by pregnancy, if we are the birth mother, to be able to learn a whole lot quicker than if we were not the birth parent. So as maternal instinct, I don't even think we should be asking, is a maternal instinct real? But again, when I surveyed my audience for this, people took that to mean different things. Some people took it as a desire to have children in the first place. Others took it as, I have a 5-year-old, and the moment I see their face when they come home from school, I instinctively know if they had a good day or not.
Yeah.
So maternal instinct could be anywhere in between that.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you held your baby in your arms for the first time. Women who had that immediate bond. Knowing. They say, oh, maternal instinct's real. But then the women who were like, well, I was ambivalent. I just didn't know what to do. They're like, I'm not sure maternal instinct's real. So again, our experience is the top down.
Yes.
Comes
and what we expect. And also from a mindset perspective, the stories we've been told about motherhood and whether we'll be a good mother and what blah.
That's an enormous part of it. So I talk about maternal instinct, I talk about nesting, I talk about the mother bear instinct, which we see play out in other animals in the animal kingdom and other mammalian mothers.
Yes.
But we've got this social cultural messaging and this expectation, and the books we've read messaging as well.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Are we nesting because we've been told that we ought?
This is what I mean.
Or is there a biological drive to do that?
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I don't know.
It is fascinating.
It's fascinating. So the book takes a look at all of those things that matter to us as mothers and all parents, broadly speaking, and it just puts that brain biology lens on it. And
I am going to be buying a copy. We can't pre-order yet, I'm guessing.
You can pre-order.
Oh, we can. Okay, so
pre-order on I think Booktopia and
perfect.
Amazon. It's coming out globally digitally on Amazon. So you download it into your Kindle, no matter where you live in the world.
Cool.
The paper version just coming out Australia, New Zealand initially. Just before Mother's Day. So it comes out on the 26th of April. So I'll be doing the Mother's Day media.
Wow.
Rounds promoting baby brain as being a good thing.
I just absolutely, I want to thank you for giving up so much time. We have gone well over time, but
I missed my Pilates class. I've got on my calendar Pilates mat today at 10:30.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll have another one in an hour.
I usually do say, do you have a hard stop? Because I could go on and on. I super appreciate not only, obviously your expertise is amazing, but your ability just to talk about these quite complex things, but break them down into the ways that we can understand them. And I'm including myself in lay people these days. Thank you for reminding me about sleep architecture. You've actually just ignited.
No. Well, I think it was really interesting what you were saying about sleep. They're not different states at different points in the life. It's super interesting to think about the importance of that. And we often hear that the health messages coming out about the importance of sleep, and there's nothing new under the sun there. But we are understanding kind of why
Yes.
now,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
I
yeah.
think is really fascinating. And just the little things like why you have a hot shower on a cold night, or
Yep.
why you feel foggy the next day during perimenopause, even if you didn't wake up. We're understanding a whole lot more about how important it is to protect that state.
Yeah, beautiful.
So if there's one piece of advice I could give, it would be that, it's to maybe go to bed a bit earlier.
Yeah, make sure your sleep is intact.
But it's easy for me to say I'm in bed by 9 most nights and sleep.
And you're a nap lover too. You
I
and
love my naps, my short strategic nap, and
yes.
I'm also a very good night sleeper. I don't have disrupted night's sleep. It's very unusual for me. So I'm an Olympian sleeper.
Yeah. Well, usually I am, which is why it discombobulates me when I spend
just the nerves of having to interview me.
It actually was partially because I was like, I really need to actually have my science brain on. The other thing that I really, really heard again and again about what you're saying is it is time to put our big girl pants on. If you're not already looking after your holistic health in terms of nutrition, movement, sleep, connection, play, making sure you get rest. If you haven't already done it, now is the time. And yeah, to me, that is the key thing. It's like, yes, you are going through a massive transition. And yes, there's absolutely brain and body changes happening. But the impact of those can be influenced by lifestyle.
Hopefully you can be one that sails through too.
Yes. I'm going to aim to sail through. I've had a bit of turbulence, but that's okay. Thank you so much for your time. And
well, it's fun to chat.
Thanks so much for tuning into another episode, and I trust you're walking away with inspiration, maybe some chiropractic adjustments of the soul where you've realized perhaps some ways that you're getting in your own way, or something that needs to be healed, or something that's calling to you that your heart really, really wants to birth or create or step into in this second cycle of life. And if that's you, I am throwing my arms wide open and inviting you to check out all of the ways that we could potentially partner together at kyliepatchett.com.au. That's my website for the podcast, and also one-on-one and group programs in midlife mentorship, yoga and breath work in specifically designed menopause classes online, and also super excitingly, a list of retreats around Australia that I have been blessed to partner with some pretty darn spectacular humans who also help midlife mavens through this transition point. So if you are looking for some support, some community, some tools, just a safe place to actually reconnect to who you are, what you want, and come home to your own power and magnificence, I would love to welcome you into any one of those containers. So head on over to kyliepatchett.com.au and I will be back in your ears very, very soon.